I forgot to add myself to the screen. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing on this somewhat fine Tuesday afternoon? Julie Roginski will be joining us in just a moment. She was finishing up a phone call, and I said, you know what? Let me just get started and you can join me. So we woke up to some a pretty disturbing post from the President of the United States this morning. Um, I kind of don't even know what else to say other than and I know we asked the question here in the title of this video, is Donald Trump threatening nuclear war? And I don't think that it is hyperbole to suggest or to, hypothesize, because Donald Trump is someone who is so mentally unwell. He is very clearly suffering from some sort of dementia, Alzheimer's, in addition to the fact that he is a malignant narcissist, um, and just a complete psychopath. So when you add all these things together, we're in a very, very dangerous place, not just as a country, but in the world. So while we're waiting here for Julie to jump on, let me just throw this up here. This was at 8:06 this morning. Today is April 7th, Tuesday. First thing I saw when I opened my phone this morning. And Donald Trump wrote on his Truth Social, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily, that doesn't even make sense. Revolutionarily, that doesn't make sense. Wonderful can happen. Who knows? All caps. We will find out tonight. One of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran." There's so many layers here. Where to begin? First of all, to even insinuate or to plan or to even verbalize genocide is a war crime. It is in direct conflict and violation of international law. Anyone, and Timothy Snyder posted about this earlier today, anyone who's even in the room hearing these discussions, being part of these discussions, is aiding and abetting and also, guilty along with the President of the United States. So to say that you're going to wipe out an entire civilization is indeed genocide. That is genocide. Which, by the way, is a word that was invented during the Nuremberg trials after the Holocaust. So it says today, or however, that now that we have complete and total regime change, which did not happen, regime change did not happen. Hello, Julie.
Hello.
We're just going through this wonderful post here from our president, just going sort of line by line as to either the laws that are being violated or just the complete lies, like the complete and total regime change, which is not something that is true. That did not happen. We will find out tonight. He's, treating this like it is an episode of The Bachelor or, Celebrity Apprentice. I don't know if he thinks this is going to make great TV, but, you can't have it both ways, because he's talking about, how the Iranian government or the Iranian regime is a murderous regime that is oppressing and murdering its people, yet he's going to say that he's going to wipe out the entire civilization. How can you possibly say that 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end? God bless the great people of Iran. And then also in the same breath say that you're going to literally kill millions of people.
Listen, I got to tell you, he is psychotic. Like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, it is just, he is psychotic. And it's time for his cabinet, which of course will never do it, but it's time for Congress to do something. Because there are plenty of people, Lindsey Graham aside, who are horrified by this on the Republican side. They just
Sure.
are.
They're just
And
cowards.
and they're just cowards. And listen, you are talking about wiping out a civilization. I just want to talk about the Persian civilization for a second. I'm not certainly an expert on Persia whatsoever, but I do know my classical history a little bit. These are the people that brought us algebra. These are the people that brought us poetry. These are the people who brought us the first empire in the Persian Empire with Cyrus the Great. Alexander the Great, when he finally conquered them, wept because of being able to conquer such a great civilization. And here you have this incurious idiot who is talking about wiping out a civilization that is thousands of years old. I mean, thousands of years old.
Yep. Older than any of us can even wrap our heads
Older
around.
than this country, older than any of us.
Way
And
older,
by
yeah.
the way, they have been horribly served by their government. I mean,
Mhm.
horribly served. The majority of the people in Iran do not want to live under this repressive regime. But when you're talking about taking out their power plants and you're talking about taking out their electricity grid, you're essentially talking about killing people on the spot because hospitals will not be able to get electricity. People will not be able to have electricity if you're going to take out their desalination plants. They already have a water crisis in Iran. You're talking about mass hunger, mass starvation, mass thirst. I mean, people are going to die,
Yep.
and not in small numbers. And
No.
it's not going to be a slow death. It'll be, a lot of it will happen very quickly. Not to mention, I just want people to understand, only he has the authority to drop a nuke. He's the
Mhm.
commander-in-chief. Nobody
Yep.
can stop him unless the generals just refuse to obey his orders, and they will always find somebody to obey his orders. I mean,
That's why they keep firing everybody.
yeah, but we're not gonna have a military coup in this country. It's just not the culture of this country.
No.
It means
No.
that, he's the commander-in-chief.
So he can do this. And listen, Donald Trump is obsessed with, being the first or the biggest or the, whatever it is that he can, claim as, being the best. And whether and if that means dropping a nuclear weapon in this century or being the first person after World War II to do so, he will take pride in that.
Michelle, you're a theater person, so you kind of, I don't know if you know this kind of old theater joke about Anton Chekhov, who's a Russian playwright, that if there's a gun in Act 1, it will go off in Act 2, right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
That's Donald Trump. If he's got nukes at his disposal, he will use them.
Yeah.
Just because he can. Just because he can. And the reality is he can. And he's going to. And you talked about World War II. I don't want to belabor this, but I said this on Saturday. I went to Hiroshima. I went, which is a place I haven't really given much thought to other than writing papers about it in college, but in the sense that, like, it wasn't, I sit around thinking about the Holocaust a lot. Whatever reason, just didn't think about Hiroshima that much until I went there. And now I can't stop thinking about it. Because again, what it did was it did not talk about, the museum there didn't talk about what happened at Hiroshima in the context of the war. It talked about what happened in Hiroshima in the context of how it affected the people living in Hiroshima on that day, on April 6, 1945. And the reality is, a lot of them died quickly. A lot of them died slowly.
Yep.
And a few survived.
Yeah.
Against all improbable odds. That was what we would consider now a dirty bomb, in the sense that the radiation, in the sense that the radiation dissipated after a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to Chernobyl, where you had that nuclear accident, where you will not be able to go into the exclusion zone in Chernobyl for the next, 1,000 years. People won't be able to live there.
Yeah.
I don't know what Trump is planning on. I just know this. if we are the only country to keep using nuclear weapons, having used them already once or twice, I should say, in Japan, if we do it again, friends, we are not going to be the only ones who A, have nuclear weapons, and B, all Iran is an example to the rest of the world to nuclearize as quickly as possible, because you don't see this happening to North Korea, right? Because I was also at the DMZ on this trip. I also stood at the border and looked into North Korea. And believe me, I'd rather be living in Iran than North Korea. As repressive and awful as Iran is, nothing is worse than North Korea. And yet we don't go after North Korea, despite the fact that North Korea is literally threatening South Korea and the rest of Asia nonstop.
Yeah.
And us. And has nuclear weapons and delivery systems, none of which Iran has. But the reason that Kim Jong-un gets love letters from Donald Trump is because he's got nukes, and Donald Trump doesn't want to be threatened by them.
Did you see what he said yesterday about him during his press conference? He talked to, actually, I have it in that chat. Let me find this. If you want to keep talking, I'll find this.
So the reason I say this is because if you're Saudi Arabia or you're Egypt, you're going to go nuclear really quickly. And is Trump going to stop it? Of course not, because they're quote unquote our allies. But friends, we are one revolution away in both those places from a repressive jihadist regime. Egypt with the Muslim Brotherhood, and Saudi Arabia with, the Wahhabis. And all of a sudden, there are going to be nuclear powers who are not necessarily friendly to the United States. This shit's going to come back to us.
Oh, absolutely.
It is just a question of whether we die naturally before some sort of nuclear event happens on our shores, at the way that Trump is going.
Yep. He's going to get us all killed. And, in one way or another, right? If it's not through, pollution and chemicals in our water and our air, or if it's the lack of public health or access to public health, or starvation and the food supply. I mean, the farmers are already warning us, right, that in the next 6 weeks, we're going to be experiencing worldwide food shortages.
Yeah. They're already rationing oil and gas. We're talking about it in Japan and South Korea, because they get 90% of their stuff through the Straits of Hormuz.
And I'm sorry, I'm just going through these clips because his thing yesterday was so unhinged. I don't know that I can find it. I don't know that it's in here, but I'll tell you that he went on to talk about Kim Jong-un. And he said, Kim Jong-un, who says very nice things about me. And he goes, who, by the way, used to call, and I apologize for using the word, it's an awful word, but I'm going to say it, said, who used to call Joe Biden mentally retarded. And then he says it again, mentally retarded. That's what he called him. And I couldn't believe my ears, how completely unhinged and horrible Donald Trump was yesterday. And it's only getting worse. And it seems as though the more he continues to get backed into a corner, the crazier he's acting. And listen, I hate to make jokes about a doomsday clock here, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that if these people were to get together, anytime soon, that they would be like, well, we're a little bit closer to midnight today than we were yesterday. I don't know. But it's funny you were talking about the Republicans, like, where are the Republicans? Mike Lawler was on CNN. Now, Julie was on MSNBC yesterday talking about Mike Lawler as somebody who is going to be in a pretty difficult election this year. And even he is not brave enough to speak up about this. And he's asked about this. I just want to play this.
New threat from the president: whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. You say the president doesn't want to do it. Does being reluctant to end a civilization make it okay?
Again, I don't think we're talking about ending a civilization. The issue. So
you don't believe? Are you saying you don't believe, Congressman? Do you say you don't believe the president's threat? Do you say you don't believe the president's threat?
Infrastructure. It is their energy infrastructure and their civilian infrastructure, including roads and bridges, that will cripple the Iranian regime and certainly their economy. That is not something we want to do because, as Ron Johnson said rightly, we are not at war with the Iranian people. We want them to be free from this oppression and tyranny that they have lived under for 47 years. But if the president has to take necessary action to strike their energy and infrastructure, that is going to cripple the regime. That is what he is talking about.
You don't believe a threat. You don't take him at his word that he will end a whole civilization.
He is talking about the energy and civilian infrastructure. That's what he's talking about, John.
Is he? Have you had a conversation with him about that? He says, never to be brought back again. He just means the bridges and the infrastructure?
Again, John, we're talking about taking decisive action against Iran's energy and civilian infrastructure. That is what the president is talking about. He's not talking about obliterating innocent people.
Okay. Do you think Congress should have a vote if the United States is going to make a whole civilization die?
Again, John, you are parsing here. The fact is, we're talking about energy and civilian infrastructure.
You know, I hadn't watched that clip all the way through. That is unbelievable, Julie. I mean, unbelievable. In New York's 17th Congressional District. That is Westchester, folks. Westchester. It's not exactly like a Republican hub.
The thing about Mike Lawler is, because I know him, he knows better. And that's the part
he does.
That's the part that kind of kills me on this, is he knows better.
Yeah.
And all of them know better. I wouldn't say all of them, but of the vast majority of them know better.
Marjorie Taylor Greene knows better. She's been like,
well, yeah, but she only knows better because she's been, kicked out of the circle, right? She's been voted off the island. And that's the thing. Like, where has she been all these years?
Right. Yeah.
Until now.
Right.
And I mean, she was cosplaying a crazy person.
Yeah.
Until suddenly she had a come to Jesus epiphany.
Right. Because she saw the writing on the wall that, after MAGA comes what?
And it doesn't really matter if they know better or not, because they're not doing anything about it. That's the part that kind of kills me on all of this.
Isn't this like the second week that they haven't, like, Congress hasn't even been to work? They're not even in session. They're not.
Well, it's Easter, Passover, blah, blah, blah. But I would say get back to work, because we're the cusp.
And get back to work.
Like, we're in World War III here.
Yes.
And they're just a bunch of useful idiots. In some ways, Trump is a useful idiot. I want to read a quote here from the people who actually run this world, because it's crazy. And the quote is from Peter Thiel, who has been spending a lot of time lately talking about the Antichrist. He was just in Rome in the shadow of the Vatican, giving a series of lectures on the Antichrist. And just to clarify, Peter Thiel, one of the founders of PayPal, the first outside investor in Facebook, a billionaire. He also was behind the funding and the founding of something called the Rockbridge Network, which we can go into another day, but it's basically a network of people who are trying to bring Trumpism as a permanent governing philosophy, and they call themselves aristocrats. Like, they want to, like, they think that that's who should be governing this country, a group of wealthy aristocrats. Translation, not the rest of us. And Trump, to some extent, is their useful idiot in that they're elevating him to be
100%.
like they're like a messiah.
Yeah.
So that after he dies, they can basically kind of deify him. And I'm not kidding, by the way, about what I'm saying here.
Oh, I know. They're going to L. Ron Hubbard him.
Yeah, they're going to L. Ron Hubbard him, or they're going to Jesus Christ him. I mean, that's what they're basically trying to do. And that's part of this whole, what Paula White is doing, like it's a spiritual advice. Like we can have a whole separate discussion about this. But Peter Thiel says something that I think is really interesting. So he's been talking about the Antichrist, and he believes and has said, conveniently, by the way, that the Antichrist doesn't need to be a person, but could be a global governing system that promulgates fear of artificial intelligence, climate change, and nuclear war. Well, that's the Democratic Party, folks, right? Like, we want to regulate artificial intelligence because it's going to kill us all.
You want to talk about the Antichrist. The Antichrist is AI.
Right. We certainly want to regulate climate change because it's going to kill us all.
Right.
But then it's interesting that he stuck nuclear war in there. Like, the Antichrist is promulgating fear of nuclear war. Translation, what's to be afraid of? Now, I don't know what kind of bunker Peter Thiel has built for himself in the event of a nuclear war, but the rest of us don't have one. And for those of us who live in New York City, if a bomb goes off in Times Square, we're all dead.
Yeah. And trust me. And by the way, you know how psycho I am. There is a website where you can find all of the fallout shelters all over the United States. And you won't believe I looked at that this morning. I was like, where is the closest fallout shelter near me?
It's not.
No, I know. It's just, it's comforting, just I guess, to know. But you know, and you know, Peter Thiel and the Antichrist. All I keep thinking about is that episode of South Park about Peter Thiel. Well, there's several episodes about Peter Thiel, but in this one in particular, Joe and I were just walking to like the FedEx the other day to like mail something, and all of a sudden Joe's like, Peter Thiel knows about the Antichrist.
Yeah, but I mean,
but it's like it's you have to laugh because it's true. It's true. It's all true. And at what point, this is where I'm like, listen, I know these people are rich, they're powerful, they're pulling the strings, people like JD Vance, and you know, he's got all these little minions, right? Blake Masters was one too, had he gotten into the Senate as well. But at what point there's more of us? Do you know what I'm saying? Like there's just by volume more of us.
But that's why they're trying to.
Can we, right?
Because that's why they're trying to bring the evangelicals along. You know, they're reaching out to these white. Look, again, you have this guy named Chris Buskirk, who's Peter Thiel's acolyte, and not enough attention's been paid to this guy. And by the way,
I don't know anything about him.
Yeah, so this is Peter Thiel's guy. This guy, strangely enough, was this ne'er-do-well kind of operative. I don't even know what to say about him. Who had gone through a ton of bankruptcies. He was being sued by collections agencies, including this dry cleaner nonstop.
Jesus.
You know, he was just some guy living in Arizona, which is where a lot of these people are. You know, he and his wife were dogged by debt and lawsuits, more than a dozen between 2011 and 2015 alone, from business partners, from collection agencies. As I said, they're dry cleaner. Most of those cases, the judgments were entered against them after they failed to respond. But then what's interesting is what happened next. In 2016, when Trump, you know, the year after Trump came down that golden escalator, and when Peter Thiel spoke at the Republican National Convention and broke with the rest of Silicon Valley to support Trump, this guy, Chris Buskirk's fortunes changed. He co-founded something called the Center for American Greatness, which is a nonprofit behind the website American Greatness. And it was given funding, early funding from Thiel. And then by 2018, 2 years later, this guy was literally being some ne'er-do-well, being sued by his dry cleaner, somehow secures access to the best real estate in journalism. He became a contributing op-ed writer at the New York Times. And from that perch, He routinely promulgated pro-Trump talking points, including his very strange fascination with attacking anyone who claimed that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help Trump. You can let your conspiracy-minded theories run wild there. And he and J.D. Vance, who also went to work for Peter Thiel after graduating from Yale Law School, founded something called the Rockbridge Network. And the Rockbridge Network effectively is this collection that was started in Rockbridge, Ohio. I want to say in 2019 at a little summit outside a little tiny town called Rockbridge, Ohio, with the goal of turning Trump's victory into a lasting political movement. And the people who were there, it was a very small collection of people, none of whom we'll talk about. It was Thiel, Rebecca Mercer, who has funded everything from startups, from Breitbart to, I mean, you name your crazy right-wing cause, like she's been behind it. She's a hedge fund heiress. Tucker Carlson, when he was still at Fox and deeply influential. And a former Romney Bain Capital guy named Orrin Cass, who just several months later would found American Compass, which is a think tank that also focuses on what a post-Trump world is going to look like for the MAGA faithful. Just 3 years later, the Rockbridge Network, with the help of Mercer and Carlson, catapulted Vance, and of course Thiel, catapulted Vance into the Senate. Remember, Vance was really behind until Peter Thiel dumped.
Yeah, he almost lost to Tim Ryan, right? Was his name? Not Tim Ryan.
No, but I mean, in the primary, he was way behind. No, he was.
Mandel.
Mandel. Yeah. And then less than 2 years after that, suddenly Trump selects Vance as his vice presidential nominee.
Right. J.D. Vance, who had never really had a job, who had been supported by Peter Thiel up to that point. Peter Thiel got him his first job, then gave him money to start some venture capital thing. And of course, J.D. Vance is like super lazy. He doesn't work hard. He just likes to be handed things from his little daddies, and which leads him to here today.
Well, but I think what's interesting is that J.D. Vance wasn't the only guy that Thiel was banking on in the same year. If you remember Blake Masters, remember that?
I do. I made attack ads against Blake Masters.
Well, but it's important to note that Thiel was also trying to get Blake Masters elected in Arizona. The best thing that ever happened to J.D. Vance was that Masters did not get elected, because that's when Thiel and all these others pushed Trump to select Vance as their vice presidential nominee. Could have easily been Masters if Masters had gotten elected.
I mean, he's such a freak.
But think about the long-term planning here by somebody like by somebody like a Peter Thiel, right? To try to put Vance one heartbeat away from the presidency, and same with Masters had Masters gotten elected. What I think is interesting is the connection here, because this guy Chris Buskirk, who's the brains behind this operation on behalf of Peter Thiel, in 2022, same year that Vance was running for Senate, Buskirk, Mercer, and this investor named Omid Malik, who had been an early supporter of RFK Jr.'s presidential campaign before flipping to Trump, they founded a venture capital called 1789 Capital, which really sits at the intersection of finance, politics, and ideology. And it's part of a broader effort by Trump-aligned donors and operatives to build what they openly described as a quote-unquote parallel economy outside of traditional corporate and financial institutions. And who joins the firm as a partner in 2024? Lo and behold, Donald Trump Jr.
Of course.
And as soon as that happens and Trump gets reelected, 1789 Capital grows into a major player. It surpasses I believe now it's 1.5 billion in assets. And it positions itself as a hub for MAGA aligned investment. And the following year, which is last year, again, the same cabal, Buskirk, Trump Jr., Malik, joined by Alex and Zach Witkoff, whose father, of course, is Steve Witkoff. And Zach Witkoff runs the Trump family's crypto fund, whose donors are secret. They found something called the Executive Club, which is a private members-only club.
Oh, yeah, I knew about that.
Where MAGA politicians and business people meet privately, right? What are they talking
basically
about?
pay a membership in order
Yeah.
to go into this place and have access.
$500,000 to be a founding member.
Yep. Yeah.
And, you know, what 1789 Capital does, which is different from a typical venture fund, is why it invests and where it invests. It's part of a deliberate strategy to channel capital into companies that align with America First principles, particularly in sectors like defense, which Trump Jr. has massive investment in. Of course, the Iran war helps there tremendously.
Right. I mean,
AI,
they have drones now.
Yeah. AI, the media, and of course, explicitly going after DEI and ESG investing frameworks. And it's embedded in the same political ecosystem as the Rockbridge network from which it emerged. You know, but the way to understand this venture fund is not as a standalone venture fund, but as part of a larger system that Vance and Buzzkirk sought to create in 2019 with Thiel's funding and Rebecca Mercer's funding.
Right.
So, and that's before we even get to the evangelical part of this. So, you know, the reason I bring all this up is Buzzkirk told the Washington Post, I'm going to read this quote because it's kind of scary, last year, about the world that they want to create. And again, this guy sits at it's a name that I want people to know because nobody ever talks about him. It's a shame that I had to do this deep dive and not the New York Times, which really should be this guy on the front page in terms of trying to tell people what's happening here. This is the world that they are creating. And I quote, "You either have an extractive elite, an oligarchy, or you have a productive elite, an aristocracy in every society." And now he goes on to say that an aristocracy is often good for the little people, I'm paraphrasing here, and should be considered, and I quote, "a proper elite that takes care of the country and governs it well so that everyone prospers." So this guy who was sued by his own dry cleaner for failing to pay his bills a decade ago now claims that he and the billionaires from milking the political system to enrich themselves are doing it out of a sense of noblesse oblige.
Yeah, sure.
And then we could talk about how that network extends to Hungary and then to Russia.
I was just going to say, because who was in Budapest today but JD Vance. So Hungary is having an election this weekend. And for the first time in 16 years, Orban is in a position where he could lose, because what he's done is really create the playbook for what Trump is doing. He was Trump before Trump. And so the fact that we have American leaders, let alone the vice president of the United States, in Budapest helping a dictator, an authoritarian like Viktor Orban, try to hold on to power this week is absolutely insane. Here is a clip of him, excuse me, just a few moments ago. He tried to call Donald Trump during a rally, and Donald Trump didn't pick up. I'm gonna play this.
I actually had a special guest that asked that I give him a phone call, and we'll see. Let's hope he actually answers, but this is going to be very embarrassing. All right.
I'm sorry, the person you were trying to reach has a voicemail box that has not been set up yet.
Okay. Try one more time. I get a good signal here. It's ringing. It's progress.
Cringe. It's so cringe.
Well, but here's what's interesting, right? This guy, Chris Buzzkirk, sits on the board, or he's affiliated with, of something in Budapest in Hungary called the Matthias Corvinus Collegium, or it's called the MCC. It's not just a school, it's a hub founded and expanded by Orban and his government to build intellectual and political bridges behind Hungary and the American right. And Buzzkirk is part of that orbit. public records have him affiliated with MCC. He's disputed the depths of that affiliation, but it's pretty obvious. And the connection between Buskirk, Vance, and Orban run through a network of Hungarian state-backed institutions that have been deliberately built to link Orban's government with American conservatives. Another one of those is a right-wing Hungarian think tank called the Danube Institute, which signed a cooperation agreement with the Heritage Foundation in 2023, while Heritage was working to create Project 2025. This guy, Oren Cass, who I mentioned is one of the founders of Rockbridge, along with Vance and Buskirk, contributed to Project 2025. And the Danube Institute was founded by the Batyány Lajos Foundation, which acts as a pass-through for the Hungarian government, which is funded in turn by Russian energy money.
Yeah. Well, and also just as a reminder to people that Viktor Orban was a special guest of honor at CPAC in Texas during the Biden administration. I can't remember exactly. I think it was like 2022 or 23. And then they held a CPAC in Budapest as well. And again, like, you know, Viktor Orban was very successful in taking one government institution at a time, crippling them, you know, taking over the media space. And it's incredibly sinister. I want to put this up here. There's a couple things. A story that came out, I believe, last month. The Washington Post reported on this, as many others did. But this was an exclusive. To tilt Hungarian election, Russians propose staging an assassination attempt. To aid Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, a friend of Russia, in his election, operatives proposed, quote unquote, the game changer, a staged assassination attempt to stir supporters, which I don't care how level-headed you are, that starts to have some wheels a-turning in your head. And then this morning, this was leaked by Bloomberg News, that there's a phone call between Orban and Putin on October 17th, that there's a transcript that leaked. And Bloomberg, published that today. Orban offered to be a mouse helping Russian lion in Putin call. Because Putin obviously needs Orban to be in power as well. And even more to that is that Orban now has made this huge talking point about Ukraine to the Hungarian people, saying to the Hungarian people, Ukraine is going to invade. They are the enemy, which of course then helps Russia. This is a clip from Anne Applebaum talking about this. I just want to play this.
Piece about Hungary election for The Atlantic and called it the first post-reality political campaign. So can you walk us through what you mean when you write that Viktor Orban is waging, quote, cognitive warfare on a new scale?
Let me begin answering that question by saying who Orban is and what he represents to J.D. Vance. Orban is sometimes described by people admiringly, people around Trump, as Trump before Trump. So he's a democratically elected leader who took over the institutions of the Hungarian state one by one, very slowly, and using both the power of the state and also money of oligarchs close to him. He took over the media, 90% of the media. He took over the judiciary. He took over the bureaucracy. And he's managed to continually change the constitution and manipulate elections and politics in Hungary so that he's stayed in power for 16 years. And in the recent years, he's done that with a lot of help from Russia, from cheap Russian oil, and also help from Russian-style propaganda. Now he's trying to stay in power by creating a completely false story. In other words, he's not talking about Hungary, which, as you point out, had been in a lot of economic trouble. He's not talking about Hungary's failing healthcare system. He's talking about Ukraine, and he's telling Hungarians that Ukraine is going to invade them or attack them or sabotage them. It's crazy. It's not related to reality, but it's really him trying to create a false picture of the world in order to get people to ignore the disaster he's created at home and vote for him. Orban has.
It sounds awfully familiar, Julie.
Well, yeah, but I want to actually go further, and I love and admire Anne Applebaum, but I think there's more to it than just that.
Yeah, that was only half the clip. She may have explained more, but yeah.
But, you know, why are these people so obsessed with Viktor Orban and obsessed with Hungary, which, by the way, you know, is a Central European, relatively small country that doesn't really export.
Yeah, it's a small country. It's not.
Yeah. Other than Viktor Orban has been carrying water for Vladimir Putin at the EU and nonstop. Right. You know, the story that I was talking about with Chris Buskirk and Thiel and all these people, it's not about ideology, right? It's about infrastructure. Because once white Christian nationalists like them build a system that connects money, media, politics, and international partners, they don't need to win every argument. They just need to outlast their opponents, who may not realize that there's a shadowy cross-national network at play pulling the strings, which is why I want to talk about this so much. Yep. And Orban is critical to this enterprise because he's the living proof of concept here. You know, while the American side of the network has just begun to accomplish its goals, and they're taking over the media. We see that, you know, every day with CBS, CNN, Warner Brothers, all of that, Paramount. They're taking over, you know, certainly they're grasping the money. They're have taken over politics. They're trying to take over all our international institutions, but they're, you know, starting to do that in the last couple of years with Trump. Orban has blazed a similar path in Hungary for the last decade and a half. He's consolidated media influence. He's reshaped the courts and institutions. He's restricted immigration and built a nationalist political system. But for that system to be durable, for it to serve as a model for the kind of permanent realignment that Rockbridge, which is this Vance, Thiel, Buskirk, Mercer enterprise, wants to accomplish here, it's imperative that Orban stay in power on Sunday. Yep. And Fidesz, his political party, is really on the ropes. And understand that this is a long-term project that runs from Silicon Valley to Washington to Budapest and then ultimately to Moscow, because that's who the patron is for Orban. It overlaps the key points with governments and interests that are not aligned with American democracy. And we need to acknowledge this.
Well, and Peter, sorry. I was going to say, Peter Thiel, there is a famous speech / clip. I wish I had it here. I'd play it, where he goes, every election, we have to like go out and spend money trying to get people to agree with us. But what if there was a better way? What if there was another way that we don't have to get all these people to agree with us or to be on our side? We'll just do it around the other way. And that's what this is. And he has very openly talked about this. I mean, these people are evil. And they're all men for the most part, 99% men. And I look at these pictures, Julie, of Donald Trump and his stupid children and Orban and Putin and JD Vance and all these men just sitting around in circles, destroying the world. And I can't help but have like a visceral reaction to it as a woman living in the world as well, because we don't do this. Women don't do this. And it is men collectively destroying the world generation after generation after generation. And I am so sick to my stomach watching it happen in real time and watch so many people stand around and do nothing and say nothing. The Mike Lawlers of the world, you know?
Yeah. I mean, look, what they're basically trying to do is they're trying to build a permanent billionaire, as they call it, aristocracy after Trump is dead. And actually it helps them if Trump is dead, because he can be controlled much better when he's not uncontrollable as a living person, right? Then they can turn him into Jesus. And I want to say again, that is actually what they're doing. I mean, they are trying to build a Messiah. out of Trump, who of course loves it. And
a child rapist, like madman.
But
Like,
look, there was an Easter event on Wednesday. Now, let's put this in context. This is during Holy Week. On Wednesday, Paula White, who is a pastor and a televangelist whom Trump has anointed as a spiritual consigliere, who runs something called the Office of Faith, whatever the hell it is, at the White House. Cuckoo. She stood before a room of quote unquote believers and declared that Trump's suffering mirrored that of Jesus Christ. She spoke of betrayal, she spoke of persecution and sacrifice, and suggested that Trump had, quote unquote, paid the price, which of course is echoing the central narrative of the Passion, which is what was going on during Holy Week when he was doing this. This is what she said. Jesus taught so many lessons through his death, burial, and resurrection. He showed us great leadership, great transformation requires sacrifice. And Mr. President, no one has paid the price like you have paid the price. It almost cost you your life. You were betrayed and arrested and falsely accused. It's a familiar pattern that our Lord and Savior showed us. And then Trump didn't dispute any of these parallels.
Of course not.
Between himself and Jesus. And this is what he said. He said, on Palm Sunday, now this is 3 days after Palm Sunday. On Palm Sunday, Jesus entered Jerusalem as crowds welcomed him with praise, honoring him as king. They call me king now. Can you believe it?
Oh, yeah. And he said, he goes, king, they call me king. And he said, he was like, I'm such a king. I can't get a ballroom approved.
Yeah. But I mean,
starts laughing.
Look at the analogy of what he's trying to do, right?
Oh,
and then, at his inauguration, he said, I was saved by God to make America great again, alluding to, shooting in Butler. And
once again, then you see this story about Russia and Hungary, and one has to wonder.
But it goes beyond that, right? Because White then once claimed last go around when Trump was in the White House that the White House is quote unquote holy ground, and said that to say no to President Trump would be saying no to God. And I say all of this, and there's much more here about the grift that, by the way, she's married to the keyboardist for Journey, the guy who wrote the song. Yes, the guy who wrote the song Faithfully.
Get out.
So that every time you stream that song, just understand every penny of those royalties go to him.
Get out.
Yeah. So I would
know that.
Yeah. So maybe don't listen to Journey. And then what they're basically trying to do. And there's a quote from a guy named Matthew Taylor, who runs a nonprofit institute called the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies down in Baltimore. And he told the Wall Street Journal that, and I quote here, the quasi-messianic attachment that many evangelicals have to Trump is a direct product of the bridge building that Paul White has done. The reason I bring all this up is because it's not a coincidence, again, that Thiel started talking about the gospel, started talking about the Antichrist, started talking about bringing in all of this Jesus stuff in here. For Thiel and the Rogbridge Network, they want to exploit, their goal is to exploit Trumpism long after Trump shuffles off mortal coil. And in that sense,
like any good religion.
Right. Nothing is more potent than turning Trump into a Christ-like figure. As long as his followers believe that he's nearly divine, and they're starting to believe that he really is divine.
Well, and here's the thing, Julie, is like, then I look and see what Pete Hegseth was doing, and his crazy pastor during Holy Week is bar Catholics from attending services that are being presented by the United States government. There's so many layers of like wrong there, but like, to which I'm like, the Catholics elected Donald Trump too. I'm like, what do you have to say when you're looking at this? But I mean, it goes to the fact that you've talked about this with Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is bigoted and hates Catholics, and a lot of these people do. They don't see Catholics as true Christians. And I mean, and I talked about this last week. This is a lot of how they were able to recruit in the Klan in the North, like, back in the early 20th century. But I just...
the reason I say all this is because, and this is really key for people to understand, you know, they preach, and Paula White preaches something called the prosperity gospel, which is if you only give me $1,000, you're going to be saved. If you only get, like, this woman has grifted.
It's like the TV evangelist.
TV evangelist. Which is where Trump first saw her. He saw her as a televangelist 20 years ago. Was like, I like this woman. Plus, she's good looking.
Right.
So, but I think what's relevant about all of this is, of course, the prosperity gospel would be something that Jesus would not recognize because he pissed off every power and rich person, you know, in the Holy Land back in the day, you know, whether it was the Romans or the people, the Jewish people running the temple. Like, the only people who liked Jesus were the poor and infirm, right? Like, that's the whole beauty of Jesus Christ. And I say this as somebody who's not even Christian, but so he would be appalled at this, which I think anybody who knows anything about the Gospels actually, or has read them actually, would know.
And the truth.
But look, if these people can take a humble carpenter from the Galilee, which is what Jesus was, and they could suddenly make him the avatar for the prosperity gospel, then why can't they turn Trump into an avatar to benefit these same billionaires who want to use him for their own prosperity and power after he is gone?
Yep.
And mark my words, it is in their interest for him to be gone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, to bring this back to Iran and what's going on there is, you know, Donald Trump, yes, is a madman and a psychopath, but there's a holy war aspect to all of this too, that people are not talking about enough.
Yep. Bless you. With Pete Hegseth, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, Craig, who's on the Illegals podcast with us, texted me today. He's like, so what are you doing tonight at 8:00 while, you know, the world ends? Like, kind of like joking, but it's just the fact that they're just kind of so openly talking about this, justifying this as a crusade. And
I don't think this is funny at all, to be honest.
No, it's not. Yeah. I mean, joking, half joking. It's more of like a, you know, if we don't, you know, talk about it in that way, we'll cry. But, you know, and yesterday there was an Easter roll, egg roll thing at the White House too, where Donald Trump took this opportunity to talk in front of children about war and people dying and bombing and things. Well, this was happening as well. The founders of illegal Russian media Operation Tenet Media were just allowed back in the country, and they were invited to the White House Easter egg roll. They fled to Canada to escape any sort of prosecution or accountability with this. And they were invited back into the country and invited to the White House yesterday.
Yep.
And, you know, this is kind of like the levels of corruption here, between foreign interference, between market manipulation, and what Donald Trump is you know, is doing every time he speaks about the war. I mean, they watch the markets go up and down and up and down and up and down, and see who's jumping in and out of the markets with, you know, huge sums of money.
And Kalshi predictions and all of that other nonsense.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And,
all right.
And I know you got to go, but the last thing I just do want to say is that there is a national Model UN convention going on in New York right now, which, if you don't know what Model UN is, it's high schools doing sort of like a mock UN thing. I did Model UN.
I was on Model UN.
Yeah, I did Model UN as well. Lots of fun. And Mike Waltz, who is the UN ambassador, spoke in front of these kids. I believe this was yesterday. There's high school children from all, like, I think like 100 different countries who all participate in this. And this is what he said when he tried to gaslight these kids about what is going on.
More chaos, violence, and more unsafe world comes to mind. But if we're being honest, that's also the world that we're living in now with the UN. So my friends across the street worry that with President Trump's peacemaking,
What time is it?
It's fine. Yeah, please.
It's been 7 minutes. Right, this is going on for like 13 minutes.
Is the Dow still up 50,000?
Praise be to Allah.
So humor me for a
In
second.
the words of our president.
So as much as they're trying to gaslight all of us, including the children of this country and the world, it's not working. And, you know, the kids who do Model UN are pretty plugged in to what's going on. And seeing that and seeing somebody like that humiliated on a stage like that it is a little bit hopeful. So take that for what you will. So.
All right, peeps. I got to run, but we will see you back here maybe later today, depending on what happens.
Yeah.
Take bets on whether Trump blinks or not at 8 o'clock. Let's hope he does, actually, because the alternative is terrifying. On that note, great to see everybody, and we will see you very soon. Bye.
Yes, and please to everyone, like and subscribe. And also, if you are not watching or following along with us, we are recording episode 4 of The Illegals this evening. It'll be out on Thursday. Excuse me, of the Americans Rewatch podcast, which kind of has something to do with this subject matter. So kind of perfectly timed. So yes, everyone, we will see you very soon. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you back here at the Mayday Network very soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.